Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Kelly Nurick, Senior Director of Products and Services with the Small Business Association of Michigan. Now more than ever, small businesses need to be protected from cyber attacks. Yet many of our members find cyber solutions to be expensive, complicated, and time-consuming. That's where our approved partner, Sensei, comes into play. Sensei simplifies cybersecurity for your company and provides deliverables that identify your cybersecurity vulnerabilities and reduce your risk and ensure that you should recover if an attack occurs. Sensei hosts a monthly webinar series that educates you in important topics related to small business cybersecurity. And today's webinar will review top cyber trends and incidents from 2022 and how they will impact the 2023 cyber outlook. Presenting from Sensei are Dave Kelly, Chief Technology Officer, and Raj Patel, Chief Growth Officer. Just to note that this webinar is being recorded and we will post on our website, and we'll also send you an email with a link that you can refer to later. You are currently muted, but we encourage you to submit any questions through the chat feature and we'll answer them as we go along. So I will now pass it on to Dave and Raj to kick us off.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for taking the time to join our webinar. Today, we'll reflect on the 2022 cyber trends and incidents. We'll look forward at the 2023 cyber trends. We'll cover some key cyber topics, including ransomware, data theft, threat actors, and cyber insurance. And then towards the end, Dave will cover the cybersecurity safeguards, which should be an important area to listen in and learn about what are the things you need to do in 2023 to better prepare against cyber incidents. So let's jump right in. Let's look at let's take a look back at 2022. So the top 3 cyber attacks were ransomware, phishing, and malware. I'm sure no one's surprised with those top 3 attack vectors. 47% of small business organizations experience a cyber attack. So think about half the attendees of this webinar experience a cyber attack. But 100% experience multiple phishing attempts. So everyone on this webinar has experienced a phishing attempt in 2022. 50% of the breaches were related to employee errors. So when we think about a cyber attack, we think about a hacker, we think about cyber criminals, but we rarely think about our employees. But 50% of the breaches start from an employee error. So we'll cover a little bit of that later in the session also. The last 2 points, half of small businesses don't carry cyber insurance, and about 42% don't have a cyber incident response plan. So those businesses think about if they had a cyber attack, what would happen? Would there be chaos? Would there be confusion? Could there be some errors? Could they pay more? Could there be more damage if they had a plan? So that's one of the things we'll discuss later is the cyber incident response plan, as well as carrying cyber insurance. When we look across the industry, no one was immune in 2022. So the orange bar is Q3 2022, and the blue bar is Q3 2021. So every industry sector saw an increase in cyber attacks. Education and government saw the most attacks. If you think about healthcare, if you think about retail, they increased 200%. And some of the other ones, like banking, insurance, legal, had a 50% increase in cyber attacks. So that attacks are increasing. Let's look at a few examples, and I'm going to start with Arnold's. Arnold's is a restaurant in Cincinnati, and Arnold's plus 10 other restaurants in the area, hackers compromised their Facebook and Instagram accounts. They accessed their credit and bank card information, and they bought ad credits. They sold those ad credits in foreign countries, and to cover their tracks, they posted inappropriate materials, and that got the account banned for life immediately. So the owners of Arnold, who owned the Facebook, Instagram account, could not access their accounts. Their accounts were gone. They tried to call Facebook. Nothing could happen. And this was in November, right before the holiday season, when they really needed their social media accounts to promote their different activities around the holidays. The Metropolitan Opera was another example. That also happened in November. Hackers shut down their website, their box office, and call center. So the Opera House could not sell tickets, could not issue refunds, could not exchange tickets. They had to work with another center, Lincoln Center, to sell their tickets, but they could only do it at $50 for a ticket. So think about it, you could get the best seat in the house for $50 during those 30 hours. It was all over the news. It was a little embarrassing for the Metropolitan Opera. They definitely lost money. They probably had some angry patrons that visit the opera. And then we all know about the schools. You know, we've heard about the multiple schools in Michigan that were shut for 2 or 3 days. But the impact is more than to the schools. Think about the students that now have to recover 3 days of schooling later in the year. Think about the parents that have to stay home and watch their children. And then it makes local news. It's a discussion topic everywhere. School officials have to respond to some of the complaints. And in one of the colleges, there's a class action lawsuit stemming from this incident. So there's numerous incidents that we know of that impact small organizations, that impact companies in Michigan. Every Monday on our LinkedIn account, Sensei provides a summary of the top 3 or 4 incidents in the past 2 or 3 weeks. So if you follow us on LinkedIn, you'll be able to read some of those incidents happening every day around us. Let's look a little bit on ransomware. So ransomware payment amounts have been increasing. So as you can see in this chart, from 2018 to 2022, the numbers are going up. So the payments, the average payment now is about 400,000, which is about 58% increase from Q3. Now that increased percentage is a little bit off because you can see the dip in Q2, Q3 in the payments, but clearly Q4 made up for the dip in the prior quarters. The good news is we are winning the war in ransomware a little. So if you look at back in 2019, just over 70% paid the ransomware. If you look in 2022, you know, it was around 40% that paid the ransomware. So what changed? I think we have better cyber hygiene. We have much mature backup systems. So companies are using really good backup systems. If they have a ransomware attack, they don't need to pay the hacker. They can restore their systems. Companies have incident response plans. We talked about 47% didn't have a plan, which means 53 had a plan, and the plan helped them recover from ransomware. And maybe we can give the government a little credit because they have a policy against paying sanctions individuals or groups. So the government is trying to make it illegal to pay ransomware. That might be a deterrent for some of the ransomware victims. Dave, I don't know if you want to add anything to ransomware.
No, I think you're spot on. That's the reason there's more awareness now to the proper way in which your backups need to be set in order to recover. And then we are seeing a slow tick up in businesses starting to put together their incident response plan, because in a ransomware event, the faster you act, the more likely you're going to be able to recover. So having a plan in place that you can activate, really important, and we're starting to see more and more folks understand that, which is contributing to the decline in payments.
Thanks, Dave. And also just a reminder, if you have any questions or have any comments, feel free to go to the chat box and add your comments, and we will stop the presentation at times to address your comments, or we might address them in the end. So again, we welcome your questions and any comments you want to share. Let's go to a data breach now. So one attack is ransomware. The other one is data breach. This is where the hacker steals your data, sells it on the internet, but your organization is now dealt with responding to that data breach. And the average cost of the data breach in 2022 was $164 a record. So think about a small business that loses 10,000 customer records. It could cost them up to $1.6 million. And where is that coming from? So the first thing you'd have to do is notify all your customers. You know, postage is not expensive, but it's the remedy. You might have to pay for their 1-year credit monitoring, and that could cost a little bit. But the more expenses are going to come from your cyber forensics experts. They need to come in and help you clean out the issue, figure out what happened, make sure the hackers didn't leave any backdoors. And their hourly rates are pretty steep. And then the legal fees are on all of this. You'll have legal fees. Certain states have notification requirements. So for example, if you lost a customer's record in California, you'd have to notify their attorney general's office, and they might even call you and do a little investigation on what happened. And all that will cost money. The other item is now we're seeing an increase in lawsuits. So when records get stolen, you know, you might notify them, you might provide remedy. There might still be a class action lawsuit back at you. And I talked about a college in Michigan that had recently had an attack, and now they're facing a class action lawsuit. But then there are other impacts. So there's loss of business. You might be shut down for 2-3 days. You might not be able to process orders. You might not be able to serve your customers. And then there's brand reputation and embarrassment that, you know, it could be the talk of town. You might lose customers because they don't think you can protect their data. So this is something that small businesses need to be aware of, especially those that do not have ransomware insurance. Let's look forward into 2023 now. And I'm going to start from the bottom. So what threats should you be most concerned about? So one is espionage from competitors. That is still a threat. Sometimes we don't think about it. I'll give an example, and this is going back a few years. There was a company in Michigan. They made small energy drinks, and they had a supply in Mexico, and the competitors were trying to access the production facility in Mexico to see what was their secret. And this company had to bring all the production in-house so they could control it. But that espionage happens today. So if you're a small business, could somebody use the internet and hack into it and take your data? I mean, think about it, when somebody hiring one of your employees and your employees taking that data to the competitor. Hacktivists are another common. You know, we're seeing more and more the different social justice platforms. And what happens here is if your company is somebody that they would target, they could deface a website, they could bring it down. And so we're seeing more of those incidents also. You might just be an innocent bystander. You might be in a city, or you might be doing something that you didn't realize could not be, and the hacktivist might not like, and you could get attacked. And then the other one that's getting bigger now is the weaknesses in the supply chain. So think about your data hosting company or your payroll company, or if you're in medical, your insurance claims being processed by a third party. If there was a breach at their location, this is going to impact you because your customers are going to come to you. You're going to have to notify them that there was a breach downstream or upstream in your supply chain. So one of the things you have to do is you got to look at your suppliers and say, are they protecting my data just like how I am? And so that's an important factor. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the top 3 ones. So if you look at the financial piece of it, hackers today have evolved to cyber criminals. They want your money. They want to make money, and that's why you see a big increase in ransomware. They're able to make a lot of money. If you looked at a few slides back, it's going to be over $1 billion of ransomware payments in 2022. They also want to sell your data on the dark web. So if they find even user IDs and passwords, they will sell that on the dark web. They'll sell credit card information on the dark web. They'll sell health records on the dark web. And so that's where the financial motivation is coming from, is they're winning the war on this. And so they're going to do more and more when it comes to more hacking that is financially driven. But the other thing that's a little bit more alarming is the increase in state-sponsored hackers. So think about hackers that countries like China, Iran, Russia, and other countries that are sponsoring hackers to hack over military sites, to hack over critical infrastructure, and at times even businesses. But sometimes businesses could be innocent bystanders. If you saw that attack on the pipeline I think it was a couple of years ago, a lot of businesses were impacted by that, even though they weren't directly attacked by the hackers. So this is one that is increasing. We're seeing a big uptick. I know, Dave, you were a captain at Michigan State Police, and you headed their Cyber Command Center. And I don't know if you want to add to the state-sponsored hackers.
Yeah, I think the critical infrastructure piece, right, could impact all businesses. And you know, my previous career at the MSP running their Cyber Command Center, we were very focused on helping critical infrastructure improve their cyber hygiene, so that doesn't happen downstream. If we have a big incident in a critical infrastructure partner, it could close down a lot of businesses over time. And then the other thing to think about is these in-state sponsored hackers, while they generally are going after you know, the government, critical infrastructure, and larger businesses, there are several of them that have started to organize now and take side work, which is basically just going after for-profit types of hacks. So there's been a couple of groups that have been identified by the FBI, one of which even actually has a human resources department, and it's organized like a business. So they're recruiting these folks, and those, because they're money motivated threat actors, are really going after whatever they can find that's open. So they're indiscriminate, and unfortunately a lot of them are the same skilled folks that work for these state-sponsored groups.
Hey,
Thanks,
Raj.
Dave.
Dave,
Yes.
we have a quick question in the chat. Do you think that the current political climate is causing more state-sponsored attacks and financially motivated attacks?
I think so. It does. I think the current, and I think it's just not political, it's the environment. We've got wars going on. We've got countries that are trying to test critical infrastructure. I think sometimes these countries are just testing our critical infrastructure for future use. Dave, do you want to add to that?
Anytime you have conflicts going on, the chance of these types of attacks increases, because they'll use it as a distraction technique to distract away from what's happening in the conflict area. So from an intelligence perspective, that's often what we see, even with smaller conflicts. And, you know, the one we're embroiled in now with Russia, the Ukraine is a much larger one. So yeah, I think it does contribute.
Thanks, Reagan, for the question, and keep an eye out. Feel free to stop us if you see a question come through. So next let's look at your employees and contractors. So earlier I talked about 50% of the attacks originate for an employee. Let's break them into three buckets. One is the negligent employee. These employees are just negligent. They're using the same password on their Facebook account as on their work email. You know, they're writing the passwords down. They're sending emails with sensitive information unprotected. So they're doing everything, you know, bad cyber hygiene. And we see these negligent ones could be, it only takes one person to break into the network. Then you have the fast worker. These are diligent workers. They're really fast. It's 4:30. They have 10 emails to get through, and they happen to click on one of the links, and that infects the network. The hacker is able to get in. So that's another employee we got to train and make sure that, hey, take an extra minute, pause, think before you click that link. And then the last one is disgruntled employees. You know, you're going to have disgruntled employees, and we've seen cases where employees will take data with them, will leave behind a back door. And I haven't seen recently, but Department of Defense had on their website all the different cases and lawsuits around disgruntled cyber attacks, and there was quite interesting real cases in there. So this is something that everyone should pay attention to. Obviously, you don't want to call every employee disgruntled, but think about your negligent and a fast worker. How do you train them to notice phishing attacks? How do you train them to deploy good passwords? How do you make sure as they work from home or a coffee shop, they're not exposing your data or not opening you up for a ransomware attack? Let's go into a poll question right now, get some audience feedback. Can we bring the poll question up? So the question is, what cyber threats are you most concerned about in 2023? So, and you might be concerned about all of them, but pick your top one. We've talked about the financial one, ransomware. We've talked about selling the data, state-sponsored, and employees. And we'll give you about 20 seconds. So just pick the option, and we'll present the results right after that. While we're waiting for the answers, we get questions. What is the dark web? And the dark web is like a dark alley. So these are areas on the internet that are, common person might not be able to see because they might be encrypted. They might be behind secure passwords, but the hackers have their doors into the dark web. But that's where they conduct all their bad business. And that's really the definition of the dark web. Can we see the results? So there we have it. So 43% of the attendees are worried about ransomware. There's another 30% about selling the data, and 20% of employees. So this is good survey data. I think it's reflective of what we see out in other surveys also.
Hey, Raj, we have another
Yes.
question related to cyber threats and trends. So the question is, what about fines from the government for personal identifiable information and PHI? How much is being paid out for these?
I don't have the data to tell you over this webinar, but we do know that fines are hefty. So if you're in the healthcare and you lose data, you can get fined. I mentioned California. California will fine you $10,000 per incident. And so if you had a breach, and you were negligent, you could potentially get $10,000 fine. And we can come back and we'll take your name and we'll email you that information on some of the fines. You want to go next slide, Reagan?
One key addition to that too is that's what they look at. They look at, was the breach caused by negligence, right? So if you're doing the things, the proper cyber hygiene things, and you have a plan in place and you can articulate that, right, then you can mitigate oftentimes those fines because, hey, we were doing everything we were supposed to do to protect this data and somebody still got in.
Yep, that's important. So let's dig into ransomware, and I'll start with there's 4 types of ransomware. So one is a crypto, which is where the hacker will encrypt your data and systems. So till you pay them, they will not give you the key to decrypt the data. The second type is a locker. They lock the user out. So you cannot log into your Facebook account or another account till you pay them the money. It could be other things. So the key users cannot log in. So that's where you lock you out. The scareware is the one that we see on our personal computers at home. I hear a number of elderly individuals that fall for this scam, where there's a virus or a malware that they download by mistake, and that pretty much blocks out the use of the computer until you pay them. They can't recover from scareware. But the nice thing today is you can take your computer down to Best Buy, any of the computer shops, and they're able to wipe this out. And as long as you have good backups, you should be able to get your data from your laptop back. And then the last one is leakware, and this is something that we're seeing more of in 2020 towards the later part of the year. So you have a ransomware attack, you tell the hacker, well, I'm not going to pay you, I can restore my systems. You spend a couple of days restoring your systems. A week later, the hacker says, that's great, but we have all your data and we're going to release it on the internet, so you still have to pay us. And this has happened also, so we call it the double extortion. And the hackers are learning also how to get better at this. So the next thing is, how do they get? So ransomware, again, is difficult to prevent, but what you can prevent is the origins of the attack. So how does a ransomware start? So one of the common ways is phishing. The hacker would send an email to your employees, and they will try to steal login credentials. And an employee clicks on it, provides the login credentials. The hacker is able to get in one door, and then they find their way to get deeper into your organization, into your systems, till they can lock your systems down and ask for ransomware. So phishing is a very common phishing. Again, you can train your employees. You can do phishing attacks, friendly phishing exercises with the employees to make them vigilant. The second thing is malware. So an employee could download a malware. If they go to a website, they could download a malware from an email. They could plug in a USB device that has malware. And now we're also seeing where software has malware. So when you update your software, now the malware gets into your systems also. So we're seeing a little bit of the increase in that too. The third area is going to be misconfigured system. So you install a server or a firewall or another device, or even think about your Wi-Fi at home or at your businesses, and you leave the default setting. The default setting are pretty well known. And so if you don't change the default settings, hackers can use that to log into your systems. You have systems that are not patched up, so they don't have the latest software, the latest security updates from the vendor, and you'd be exposed to that. You'd have open ports. You might have older software versions. And for hackers, it's very easy to find this system because they have software they'll run through the internet and identify which companies or organizations have misconfigured systems, open ports, and it will give them a target list of who to go after. Then the last one is zero-day vulnerabilities. And what this is hackers try to find holes. Vendors like Microsoft or Google or Apple realize, wait a second, we have a little gap in our system. They're trying to do a fix. It might take them, 2-3 days or a week or 2 weeks for the fix to come out. In that period, everyone's exposed to that 0 day. What also happens is when Apple does their fix, if you don't update your phones or your iPads or your computers for another 30 to 60 days, you're exposed to this 0 day vulnerability. And hackers know about the vulnerabilities. Hackers will target companies that are behind on their systems. So these are the 4 ways that ransomware origins come, typical of 4 ways. And so if you focus on these 4, you can reduce the risk of ransomware. If you go now to data breach, they have the same 4 origins that we talked about before. Phishing is one way that data gets breached, access accounts, malware. But now with the data breach, you got to think about your supply chain. So let's have an example. You have an IT vendor hosting your systems. If they have a breach, your customers are impacted. Your customers going to expect you to follow up with them, not your IT vendor. Same thing. If you're a medical practitioner, you might have somebody processing your bills, submitting medical claims. If something happened at the insurance company or the pay provider, that could impact you also. So it's very important from a data breach standpoint is to assess your vendors and customers and say, what are you doing to protect my data, my customers' data, and are you doing enough? Are you protecting at the same level that I am? And supply chain attacks at third parties is a big concern also. So do not ignore. Think about which of your vendors or customers have access to your customers' data, to data that you need to protect. Then you need to go make sure that they're putting in all the right controls to protect them. Dave, you want to talk about cybersecurity being a chronic condition?
Sure. I think this is a really good way to think about it. Basically, it's much more affordable to be involved in prevention of cyber incidents than it is to cure one once it happens. Raj mentioned earlier, for 10,000 customer records, it can be, up over $1 million in total costs to recover from that. And your preventative measures would be a lot less. I can give a short example. We recently had someone reach out to us who had been the victim of an account takeover. And what happened was their Microsoft email account was taken over. There were some things that could have been put in place that could have prevented that, but they didn't. This was a company with 3 employees who became a target of this incident. There was a distribution that was being made from one of their suppliers, a 6-figure distribution, and the hacker managed to have that rerouted to another bank account. So not only did they lose that 6-figure distribution because it was gone immediately, it went from one bank account to another, as they often do. Now they had a problem in their system, and they had to pay another $17,000 to have that problem identified and remediated. And one of the things that came out of that remediation was this company did not have logging enabled on their email account. So when the forensic work was done, they were not able to determine exactly how the threat actor got into their systems because logging was never enabled. So this goes back to the good cyber hygiene practice up front on prevention, right? So if we had done these things up front, we could have prevented the attack. If we couldn't have prevented the attack, we would at least have information in the logs to show how the attack happened, so we can make sure we configure things properly to prevent it from happening in the future. So again, that goes back to these can be really expensive on the back end and much more affordable on the front end if we're involved in doing the proper cyber hygiene things to prevent and also make sure we're able to respond appropriately. So now I'm just going to talk about a few of those things, right? So we talked a lot about kind of what we saw in the past, year, what we see moving forward. So this is more about what types of things should we start thinking about to protect ourselves from these incidents, or at least be prepared to respond should we have an incident. And I'm going to kind of work from left to right across these slides, and I'll touch on a couple of the bullet points. So the first and most important thing we need to do is we need to understand where are we in our cyber hygiene maturity, right? What's our baseline and where should we try to go? At Sensei, we have something called the Sensei Score, which think of it like a FICO score for your cyber health. It's a 1,000-point scale, so just like a just like a FICO score. We're trying to get our clients over that 700 so they have good cyber hygiene. There are several tools out there, but the first thing you need to do is understand where you are, establish your baseline, and then build a plan to move forward, right, and improve your score over time. Policies. Do we have cybersecurity policies? These are different than your general IT policies. These are focused specifically on prevention, right? And secondarily, it's one thing to have a policy, but if nobody sees that policy, we're just checking a box. So it's really important that our employees are trained on these policies, on the cybersecurity policies, so they know what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. And, oftentimes we see policies handed out during onboarding. Maybe the employee reads them, maybe they don't, right? But when it comes to cybersecurity, it's really important that they're continuously trained on what are our policies and what should we be doing and what shouldn't we be doing. Executive briefings, cybersecurity. In order for your company to be secure, there needs to be a top-down, bottom-up approach. So on the bottom side, we're making sure our employees are doing the things we want them to do, but it really is important for executive leaders, owners of small businesses to at least have a basic understanding of where you are in your cybersecurity journey, and then be able to communicate that to your employees, right? So if the owner of the company cares about it, the employees are going to care about it, right? So understanding where you are, even on the basic level, really important, because then that trickles down to your employees and creates a good cyber hygiene culture. Education and awareness, really important. The example that I gave earlier could have been prevented. There were some indications in the email, even though it was the real account, it was account takeover, there were some indications in the email that this was potentially not legitimate. And if those things could have been recognized, we could have potentially prevented that wire from going out. So continuous awareness training on cybersecurity for your employees, really important. And nowadays, it's, you know, a lot of times we view training as, oh man, I'm gonna have to go take this training. It's gonna be really, you know, a pain. But we should start viewing cybersecurity training as actually an employee benefit, because all of us now, particularly when there's working from home, you can see I'm in my home office right now. We can use these things at home to secure our home Wi-Fi, to secure our home networks, to secure our social media accounts, to help our children be more secure online. So the more we can learn about these things through work, we can take those things home with us and improve our home lives and our families' lives. Secure access. You know, we need to have an understanding. What we see a lot of times is companies grow over time, and we need some application for one person in accounting or one person in HR, and we buy it, and it doesn't get into our inventory. We don't even know we have it, right? So it's really important to know what do we have and who has access to it, and then to limit access to only those folks who need to have access to those particular programs, because then we reduce our threat vector, right? If we give everybody access to everything, our threat vector is really large. If we have pared down access to various things, our threat vector becomes much smaller. So it's important to make sure we know what we have and we know who has access to it. We see that that's a challenge. Secondarily, I'll talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication. It's really important. We've talked about it on other webinars, but one thing I want to point out here is the biggest threat to our organization are really our administrators, right? Because the administrators have keys to the kingdom. And oftentimes these are people who have, you know, privileged access. They can access the back end of the system. They can access everything because they're our IT people. We need to make sure that they're using multi-factor authentication as well, right? And oftentimes, you know, we think, hey, the IT guys know what they're doing, but reality is, if one of their credentials gets breached, that's the worst type of breach we can have, right? Because that can spread through the whole network. So think about enabling multi-factor behind your firewall for your administrative folks, your administrative access folks. Infrastructure, I'll touch on. You can read the list here. There's several things you have to be aware of to secure your infrastructure. But I want to talk a little bit about what Miraj mentioned earlier, which is zero-day vulnerabilities here. So patching is critically important, but in order to patch, we have to have a good inventory and know what we have, right? So the first step is, what software do our employees log into, and what hardware do we have in our inventory, right? And then we need a mechanism with which to know when these security patches are released and make sure that they're installed, because a zero-day vulnerability is already a known vulnerability. So as Raj mentioned earlier, if someone's scanning networks from the outside, they're going to know that that thing exists. So it's important that we patch it quickly. And secure cloud, it's really the same thing. It's just a different type of infrastructure. So either you have it on premise or you have it in the cloud, but the security principles are the same. External vulnerabilities. Do we have a tool or a service that's doing exactly what these threat actors are doing, right? Which is scanning from the outside in, right? We need to have an understanding of, do we have open ports? Is our website configured correctly? Do we have, are we vulnerable to something called session hijacking because our website wasn't, you know, configured correctly? So we need to be doing external scanning. Penetration testing is another thing. If you're a larger organization, that can be done. That's looking at your network from the outside in, right, as opposed from the inside out, which transitions to the next one nicely. Internal monitoring, right? Do we have logs? Are we monitoring our internal systems? Are we scanning them to make sure there's no anomalous behavior inside our network? As I mentioned in the previous example, by virtue of that company not having their logs turned on, they really couldn't determine how this person got access to their email account and was able to take it over, and thereby much more difficult to make sure we prevent it from happening again. So again, good cyber hygiene, kind of involves all of these things combined together. Alerting, this goes back to, our inventory. Okay, we know what we have now. We know what our employees are logging into. We know what hardware we have. How do we know when we need to patch something, right? Good example, a couple of months ago, for our clients, there was a 0-day vulnerability on a Cisco small business router, right? Cisco small business routers were in 2 of our clients' ecosystem. And because we knew about it and we had alerts set to that, we were able to notify them immediately, hey, you need to patch this right away. It's a 0-day vulnerability. And they were able to do that. So you have to have a mechanism in place to sort of deconflict what patches are out there against what you have in your inventory. Incident response plan, I think this is one of the things that we see most small businesses not having or not thinking about, right? You have to think about cybersecurity from a holistic approach, right? Yes, we need to do things to protect ourselves, and we need to implement policies and best practices and train our people. We also really need to be prepared to respond should an incident occur so that we can recover. So a good incident response plan will be step by step. It will say, if we believe we have an incident, here's the first step that we take, here's the second step that we take, walking you all the way through. The idea is if you experience an incident, that plan will allow you to make decisions quicker, because it's really important that we make quick decisions to keep that, whatever it is, from spreading throughout the network. A good incident response plan will also talk about how do we communicate with each other, right? All of our systems are down. Now how do we communicate with each other? So you need a plan to do that internal communication when your systems are down. And then how do I communicate externally, right? Obviously, I have an incident. What do I say to my employees? What do I say to my vendors? What do I say to my customers? So there should be templates in there in your incident response plan that you've signed off on internally, that here's how we're going to communicate, right? So again, the quicker you respond, the less chance you're going to have of more adverse consequences. Backup and recovery, we talked about this a little bit earlier from ransomware. This is the key really to recovering from a ransomware incident. Having our backups properly set up, and also testing our recovery, right? So now we got everything set up. We think we're in good shape. Have we tested it to make sure we can recover, right? Something that we often forget to do or we get too busy to do. But really important to know that once we get things set up correctly, we can recover. And then lastly, cyber insurance. It's important to check your policies. I think we're seeing a lot of clients that think they have cybersecurity insurance, but what they really have is just disruption insurance. So, there's a lightning storm, a server goes down, it gets covered, but there's a cyber incident that's actually not covered. And when it comes to ransomware, one good thing for everybody to know is with most insurance companies, ransomware is an actual separate policy. So even if you do have cybersecurity insurance, it may not cover you from ransomware if you don't have an additional rider for ransomware. So be sure to check your policies if you do have them.
Yep. So Dave covered quite a few points over here in the last few slides. You can find these same points. We do have a blog that was written earlier this month that covers the same topic, and it covers all these points that Dave pointed. You can find that blog on our website at sensei.com, and you can go into our resources and blogs. You can also find it on our LinkedIn site. We posted the blog. So you can, after the webinar, if you want to remember what Dave said, feel free to go access the blog, feel free to share the blog. It also talks about some of the trends that I mentioned earlier also. I'm going to expand a little bit more on cyber insurance. There we go. So what we saw in 2022 was cyber insurance premiums went up nearly 25%. And this was really from insurance companies wrote a lot of cyber insurance policies in the last 3, 4, 5 years. And then the last 2 years, they were seeing like they were paying out more and more on these policies. So they're raising premiums. And we expect this trend to continue in 2023. But what we're also seeing now is insurance companies are getting a little bit smarter. There's more exclusions, there's more restrictions in the policy. So when you get your policy, when you're trying to renew a policy, make sure you also focus on the exclusions. What's excluded from my policy, and what are some of the restrictions they're putting on me on the policy? The other things that the insurance companies are going to ask in 23 is they're going to ask for evidence of implementing effective cybersecurity safeguards. So they'll ask you to fill out forms, but now they're also going to ask you for evidence on your cyber hygiene. They're also going to request multi-factor authentication, encryption. So these are things I've heard clients say, you know what, yeah, when I renew, I have to put in multi-factor, otherwise we would not get cyber insurance. I had an insurance company tell me, if a company doesn't have cyber insurance, multi-factor authentication, it pretty much doubles the premiums. So we'll see more of that coming. But the other one also is insisting that continued compliance of the terms to approve file claims. So not only were you compliant in the time of renewal, but 4 months, 5 months down the road, that you had continued compliance with all your cyber hygiene for them to approve your file claims. And then the other piece that it's coming up recently is there's some legislation around this, is where insurance companies could deny claims from state-sponsored threat actors. The only problem is, that's a very loose defined term today. How do you define what's a state-sponsored threat actor? Who defines it? It's not like, another country is going to say, oh, no, we were behind that attack. They don't normally say that. So that's a gray area right now. We'll see how this shakes out in 23 and 24. But I think the biggest fear small and medium-sized organizations are fearing right now is, will they be able to get adequate cyber insurance at an affordable price? And so my key feedback is really start early, implement these safeguards, make sure you've got your cyber hygiene in place before you apply for a cyber policy, because once you apply for the policy that creates a baseline, it's tough to get lower premiums and better coverage. So make sure you've got your cyber hygiene in place. So as we start wrapping up this webinar, I had a couple different studies here. So one was mid-December, FBI puts a notice out there. They're worried about a wave of attacks against America's small businesses. And this report was based on the investigations they've done. They're starting to see more attacks at small businesses. And one of the things pointed out in the report was larger organizations that are spending a lot of money, putting a lot of resources. They have dedicated teams that handle cybersecurity. So hackers are pivoting to the small and medium-sized organizations that are not putting in the same level of effort. And so here's a warning by FBI, and I've seen similar reports by other organizations. But yet, when you look at CNBC's Q4 small business survey, only 30% of small business owners are concerned with cybersecurity as their top concern. And so you start thinking about, well, what's the reason behind the differences in these two thought process and reports? And I think small businesses have other pressing issues. The supply. But cybersecurity is a silent threat. It's out there. You don't know it till it hits you. But one thing also is cybersecurity, you can do something about it. You might not be able to do something about the recession or the inflation or the supply chain issues, but you can clearly do something about cybersecurity. You can put in all these cyber best practice or better cyber hygiene that Dave talked about earlier. Those are things you can do. You can train your employees. You can set better passive policies. You can have great backups. You could put in an incident response plan. And I think that's the key takeaway here is it's a silent threat, but it's out there and you can prepare against it by focusing on some of the core things like, employees, policies, backups, etc. We're going to do a few poll questions. I wanted to see what your thought was on this trend. So just want to see how you feel. So let's go to poll question, the second one. So I'm curious, are you concerned that your business will be a victim of cyber attack in 2023? It's a quick yes, no. And this is a good way to just get the pulse from all the attendees. We see the results, Reagan. So 63% said yes, 37% said no. But that's I think that's it's a little bit opposite of what the CBS index survey was, but I think that's a good poll. Let's go to poll number 3. How confident are you confident in your ability to quickly recover from a cyber attack? So if your organization had a cyber attack, what's your confidence on ability to quickly recover from a cyber attack? And I say quickly, can you recover within a day? Let's see the results. Okay, so that's good. At least half feel pretty confident that it can recover, and I think that's a reflection of the work you've put in, putting in good cyber best practices. And so let's look at the next question, which ties to your confidence level. Is let's go to question number 4, which is the last poll question. Have you done an evaluation of your cyber health? So one thing is to say, I feel confident, but have you had a third-party evaluation? Somebody come in and said, we looked at your cyber health and we agree with you. You should be able to recover pretty effectively. And let's see the answer to this poll. It's about 58% have had an evaluation of cyber health. It's always good to get some outsider come in and do your cyber health evaluation, see where your holes are and your gaps are. There's about 42% that have not. And if you go to the next slide, okay. So one thing, oops, let me go to the next slide, is Dave covered what a Sensei Score is earlier. I'm going to refresh your memory. So a Sensei Score, we had promised everyone that attends this webinar that we would give you a free cyber health evaluation, which would uncover your Sensei Score. So the Sensei Score is more for your company versus an individual. It is like a FICO score. It's on the 1,000-point scale, and we want companies to be over 700, ideally over the 800. And when we do this health evaluation, it's about a 15, 20-minute meeting. We go over 38 different touch points of cybersecurity, and we'll go over, like, do you have multi-factor? How do you do your passwords? How do you train your employees? And based on the answers, our algorithm will generate your Sensei Score. And so think about if your score was 400, if you had a 400 credit score, you can't buy that new electric vehicle that you're thinking of buying. But then you know where your gaps are and you can put in a plan. So there is a QR code up there. You can scan that code. It will automatically find times available to schedule that meeting. Pick a time that works for you, and you can schedule your meeting. Again, we've done a number of these meetings with companies, and every company has found it really helpful because it makes them think, the owner think. The other day I did one and asked the owner, are your backups encrypted? And the person said, well, I really don't know. And it's something that you might want to ask your IT vendor is, hey, are my backups encrypted or not? So again, we want to give everyone the Sensei Score. It's going to be a third-party evaluation. It's at no cost to you, no obligation to buy any of the Sensei services. But it's a good way. It's a number. It's easy to know, easy to remember. So that wraps up our webinar. We're going to open it up for questions now. Do we have any questions or comments? If you want to share any comments, we can do that too. And Reagan is watching our chat line, so we'll see what questions we have. Dave, anything you want to add while we wait for questions?
No, I just wanted to thank everybody for sticking with us this whole time, and just say that I hope you did learn something valuable today that you can take back with you to improve your cybersecurity.
Reagan, do we have any questions in the chat box?
Yes, we do. Having trouble seeing the whole thing. The question is about things like Lumu. Do you suggest those third-party evaluations, if you've heard of Lumu?
I have not heard of.
I've not heard of Lumo either. We'll have to get back to.
Okay. Another question is, what is the best piece of cyber advice you have ever received?
So that's a great question. I will tell you the best cyber advice I've given to my kids. I have 3 children, and the best piece of advice I've given them is not to share their passwords. I find them sharing their passwords amongst their friends, even the Wi-Fi password at home. We've set up 2 Wi-Fis, a guest Wi-Fi and a personal Wi-Fi, and I always have to remind them not to share passwords and create strong passwords. But to me, I've been in cybersecurity 25 years, so I'm having a hard time what the best advice that was given to me was. Dave, how about you?
Yeah, I would say probably the best piece of advice is take some time to understand the basics, right? Understand the basics of what is cybersecurity. So it's about identifying, detecting, protecting, responding, and recovering, right? So if you can understand what the basic concepts are and how they fit into your ecosystem, you don't have to get into the technical details. You don't have to get into the technical weeds. You'll be able to ask the right questions of your IT provider or your internal IT person, right? And that's probably the best advice that I got when I first came over to the Cyber Command is, hey, the first thing you need to do is understand what is cybersecurity on a foundational basic level.
Then we can fit in one more question, Reagan, before we wrap up.
There aren't any more in the chat.
Yep. Well, the last point I'm going to make is, so Sensei is committed to helping small and medium-sized organizations with cybersecurity. That's our sole mission. We focus on small and medium-sized. So that's why we work with Small Business Association of Michigan, but we're focused more on education and awareness. And so what we've done is we do this monthly webinars for SBAM members. So feel free to tune in next month's webinar. If you want to look at a prior webinar, you can go to our website and the recorded versions are there. We also provide resources to SBAM. So anytime we write a blog, SBAM will promote it on their sites. We also promote doing things on our LinkedIn site. So if you want just a general education awareness, please just follow us on LinkedIn. Follow SBAM on Facebook. I hear Facebook is a strong platform for SBAM. So if you follow them, you're going to get all our tips and educational material. If you have a question, you can go to Ask the Expert on the SBAM page, and we actually get those questions and we'll follow up with you and give you the answers that you need. So again, lastly, thank you, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed, you found this content useful, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.